I'm not able to do that with the curtain on.
You need to drop the curtain.
Yeah, okay.
We're live.
Hello, everybody. My name is Stephen Butler. I'm a volunteer here at Tse Chen Ling. We want to welcome you to Big Love, Remembering Lama Yeshe. I'm going to turn it over to the formal host of this program for Tse Chen Ling, Lynn Sonnenberg, and she's going to introduce what's going to happen today. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Stephen. Welcome, world, to a couple of hours of remembrances of Lama Yeshe, Lama Thubten Yeshe. This is the second year Tse Chen Ling has hosted such an event. This time, not in our brick and mortars, blessed Tse Chen Ling Center for Tibetan Buddhist Studies in San Francisco. Oh no, we're going out to the world, in space, and we're gathering some people to come back from the San Francisco Bay Area. And then we finally got it through our heads that we could reach out even a little bit more. So we've got folks coming here from Canada, Australia, you'll see in a while, the Boston area, and where else? United States, something like that. And I expect there are some people out there in the world that are from different countries. Oh, England also. And virtually, we've been able to extend our reach. And before I turn the program over to Judith Weitzner, one of the earliest students, we've been calling ourselves the oldest students, and not even me. I was unfortunately distracted in the 70s, but all the people here, almost all of the people here, were the earliest and oldest students of Lama Yeshe, and happy to have them. Before I turn the program over to Judy Weitzner, I want to introduce the Tse Chen Ling production team. And sometimes they're going to be popping in throughout this program. And starting with Stephen Butler, who's at the Facebook keyboard. And by the way, he'll be harvesting questions or comments that you guys make out in Facebook land. And meanwhile, the little Zoom room is going to be schmoozing in just a minute and talking with Judy, leading the whole thing. Mary Ellen Kirkpatrick. Hello, Mary Ellen. Cindy Fong. Cindy is behind something. There she is somewhere. Anyway, they are going to be wrangling the old students in the Zoom room. So pay attention to them, Zoomers. Let's see, here's my notes looking at, okay. I want to thank a few key people who helped make this happen. Nick Rybush, Megan, and his staff at Lama Wisdom Yeshe. Lama, how's it go? Help me, Nick. Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive. There we go. Gave us full access to their treasure trove of documents, photos. I mean, wonderful, what we call assets, and you're going to see them sprinkled throughout the program. Thanks, Nick. And of course, our event today sweetly synchronizes with the recent publication of Big Love, the dynamic biography written by Adele Hulsey, who's going to be piped in later from Australia. And it's called Big Love, The Life and Teachings of Lama Yeshe. And I think I'm using a word that Lama Yeshe did. I'm not sure. It's Pamtastic. Pamtastic. Does that work? Is that? All right. And in addition to collaborators, Stephen will post in the comments section on Facebook. So you people out in Facebook land will see some more people who've made this whole thing happen, including our director, who I noticed joined us earlier. There she is. Jampa Chotso, otherwise known as Venerable Carol. Yay, Carol, director of Tse Chen Ling for, 30 years? Oh my goodness. So that's because of Lama Yeshe and his heart son, Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Now I get the privilege of introducing Judy. Judy Weitzner is one of the early students, as I said before, and she's going to work the Zoom room and invite comments from the Zoom room so that people, and stories and anecdotes, so people can hear them throughout the world. For me, and maybe many of you watching today, Lama lives on through his students, Many of them have been and continue to be our teachers in one way or another. Judy is one of mine. And for those of you getting a taste of Lama Yeshe for the first time, enjoy. Judy, over to you. Unmute. Judy needs to unmute. There you go.
Okay, I'm unmute. Remember the days when old students were people who had maybe a year or two of Dharma teaching ahead of us, and that we were all in our 20s and called old students. I remember at the Yucca Valley course kind of shivering in my boots because Lama would call randomly on an old student to give a Dharma talk or a teaching, and I was so fearful that I'd be called on. That concept of old student has changed now. Looking at all of our faces, we are old, actually old students. And I feel since we are actually old and probably our time here on earth is more limited, we should get together and get those memories out there for everybody else who is interested in Lama Yeshe. Lama would have loved having this meeting in space. You all know this would just thrill him, the idea that we could meet in space. He reminded us often that we could meet in space. And here we are doing it. And I have little doubt that somehow he's checking in space with us today. I want to start out now with a pre-recorded bit that John Landau did. John on the screen does not look like John who is in the video. You'll see he's changed his look. So here this part is our just getting grist for the mill here. Memories are flowing, I think. So now we'll go on to John Landau's pre-recorded tape about just kind of his first meeting with Lama Yeshe. And Marianne's having a little, she's going to cue it up.
I went to India for the first time at the end of 1970.
Mm.
I went to India for the first time at the end of 1970, nearly half a century ago. Before then, I had had no direct personal contact with any living Buddhist tradition. And in those days, there was precious little to read. It was authentic, especially about the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. But at Christmas time, at the urging of a friend who had already been studying for a year in Dalhousie, which is a North Indian hill station, and not far from Dharamsala, where His Holiness the Dalai Lama resides, I visited India for the first time. The Lama my friend had been studying with was the great master Geshe Ngawang Darge, and I was going to join those classes with Geshe-la once the winter weather had passed. In the meantime, my friend and I planned to visit South India, which was quite a bit milder. So, very soon after I arrived in India, I met up with my friend in Bodh Gaya, the site of the Bodhi tree, and the most important of all Buddhist pilgrimage sites. And our tour of the South was going to begin from there. But while we were still in Bodh Gaya, word came that the Tibetan Lama, who had recently arrived from Nepal, was going to give a talk in English in the Tibetan Gompa, or meditation hall. And since my entire reason for coming to India was to study Buddhism with masters from the Tibetan tradition, I, of course, jumped at the chance to listen to him. The crowd that filled the Gompa was mostly made up of hippie freaks who had flocked to India from America, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand, making their so-called spiritual journey to the East, to borrow the title from one of the works by Hermann Hesse, an author who was very popular with members of the Western counterculture at that time. A few minutes after we were all settled in, a rather respectable-looking American couple entered, escorting between them a Tibetan monk. As the crowd became respectfully attentive, this radiant monk, with a very friendly, elfin-like expression on his face, made his way slowly to the front of the room, sat down on a cushion in meditation posture, chanted a mantra 3 times slowly in a low, resonant voice, and entered into a place of profound stillness that seemed to absorb everyone in the room. I cannot say what was going on inside anyone else at that time, but later, when I tried to describe what I was experiencing, I could only say that it felt as if my heart were filled with iron filings that previously I was unaware of, but now they were being stirred into motion by the sudden appearance of a powerful electromagnet that had just entered the room. After a period of deep silence, the Lama, who of course was Lama Yeshe, as I only found out quite a bit later, began to talk. Now, to say that the language he spoke to us in was English would be quite an exaggeration. His pronunciation was unlike anything I had heard before. His sentence structure, if I can call it that, was unruly. And occasionally, he seemed to fuse 2 different words together to create something new and unusual. But despite all this, I felt I had never before been in the presence of anyone who communicated so directly to my own heart. To give one example, at one point, I thought I heard him say in a very halting fashion something like this: then strong coming in heart, warm peeling. And I remembered wondering, what is appealing? And by the way, what is this warm feeling suddenly growing in my chest? Then it suddenly dawned on me that what he was describing was what I was experiencing at that very moment. But he did so directly, bypassing the needs for words. I don't remember anything else he talked about in that hour, but I do remember very clearly how he completely put to rest the biggest qualm or doubt I had had from some of the Buddhist reading I had done. In those readings, I had often come across the rather unusual word desirelessness, which was described as an admirable state of being that spiritual seekers could achieve. Well, I was 26 years old at the time, and desire was certainly not something I wished to overcome, quite the opposite. So I wondered, perhaps if I were to follow the Buddhist path seriously, maybe I could become calm and serene and balanced. But would that be any different than becoming like a wooden statue, perfectly balanced and poised, but inert and lifeless? This did not appeal to me at all. But spending an hour in the presence of Lama Yeshe completely obliterated this misconception. And he did so not by anything he said, as much as by what he was. There was someone who was fully alive, completely engaged, incredibly funny, and in total contact with all the people in the room. So I quickly realized that if this person had achieved desirelessness, it didn't turn him into anything less than human. Rather, his human qualities came out so much more strong. And were not diminished by whatever spiritual attainments he had received. And it was clear to me that he had achieved something, but he had not lost his human touch at all. In fact, if anything, it was his humanity, his warmth, his engagement that struck me the most.
Thank you so much, John. That was lovely. It gives us some things to think about. Later on, someone else might want to talk about Lama's English a bit. Some of those phrases really were interesting and fun to work out over the years, what he was meaning. We're going to move on now to a little offering from Chodok, when Chodok first went up to Kopan.
Same time. I was a junior in high school.
Wow.
And then began a long journey. Eventually I ended up in Nepal. And I went to Kopan. And on the way there in Almora, I met a woman named Olivia D'Hauteville. She was the niece of a guy named Aldous Huxley. Brave New World.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm just some backward Indian boy from Utah." And she said, "No, you should meet." And then she told me about these Tibetan lamas, Kopan. So I ended up going to Kopan. So I went up on the hill. It was 2 miles behind Bodernot. And there was Zina Bashevsky there. There was Anila Ann McNeil was there. Mommy Max Matthews was there. Massimo Corona was there. And I was there. That was it. So when Lama came in, he didn't just walk in. The door kind of like didn't open. It's sort of like, it was like Sonny Liston walked in. The door slammed open. And Lama Yeshe stomped to a cushion that was at the end of the hall. And right in front of it, or right behind the cushion, was the statue of Avalokitesvara. And Lama Yeshe popped himself down on that and raised his hand up like this and snapped his fingers. And he said, "Okay, hippies come here and they look at the sunset and they go, 'Ooh, how beautiful sunset.' But that's because they're confused." "What's confused?" And he said, "Lama thinks sunset ugly. Why? Because sunset make attach, and attach is ugly." I thought, that's interesting. this is going to get good. Then he proceeded to explain that anything that's beautiful isn't necessarily beautiful, because if it makes you attached, it's bad. So that was my introduction to Lama Yeshe.
Fantastic.
I know that one of Chodok's best friends from early times is here today, Pende. Do you have any further comment on that time with you and Chodok together?
Chodok and I became quite good friends, and we met at the Thubten Yeshe Monastery, which is a large monastery near Mount Everest. And I was there doing a trek, and he was there to seek ordination. So the first thing he needed was a haircut. And I had seen earlier that day a monk shaving the head of a young monk. And so I introduced them, and that's where he got his haircut. Unfortunately, the barber was just using a sharpened butter knife. So by the end of the day, he had achieved some relief from that experience, but there he was with the shaved head. And we had a smoke together, and the following day he was going to get ordained, and I was headed up to Mount Everest. And we didn't reconnect until I arrived at Koh Phan for the 5th meditation course. I got there a little early to be able to help with the preparations. And so we worked together and talked a lot. And I could see how he interacted with Lama Yeshe. And I thought that he would be a good guy to pal around with, to learn how to interact with such a spiritual master. And so that's how we became such good friends for such a long time.
Thank you, Pende. Let's listen to the last roll in here, and that is Steve Pearl.
Steve Pearl was Steve Molaski, or I have been known as Thubten Samden, and this is a video of the tower I built at Koh Phan, Nepal, in the early 70s. Saying of Lama Yeshe was a response to a question when somebody asked if he was an arhat. And he replied by saying, no, I'm a long way to go, baby. Profound interactions with Lama Yeshe. Perhaps among them, the most profound was one quiet evening alone with him. I come to thank him for a number of things and asked him if he could help my mind. And at that point, he didn't respond verbally, but I felt a warm glow spread through my heart. And he didn't need to say anything other than that. That really cinched the deal. And that nobody I've ever experienced has been able to touch me like that. And it is perhaps my most treasured memory.
I think a lot of people felt that warm glow. And I noticed in something John Landau said, it was as if he was pouring something into me. I had that experience too, and many of us did, that he wasn't just in his body. He reached way beyond his body all the time. I'd like to do a go around now with all of you who are here, and you can speak a little anecdote. If there was a moment that you remember that when you knew Lama was special and you knew you trusted him and wanted him to be your teacher, or an anecdote or an experience of teaching that stands out for you, just what comes to mind now with the things you've heard so far. Can I start with Bev and Richard up there in the corner?
Okay. I've just been reading Big Love. I finished the first volume and I'm just starting on the second one. And it's a really amazing book. I'm enjoying every single story and anecdote in it. And so inspiring, and how magical Lama was, you know, always appearing at the right time, and just having that right touch, either verbally or body language or a look, to all these people who are spoken about in the book. And I was always overwhelmed by Lama's energy, and all Lamas that are connected with them overwhelmed by their energy, and I always kind of stayed back, and I never did people did who got close to Lama, which is to say, you know, how can I help you, or what can I do to you know, be connected. I was always in the background, but still, even so, you know, I had my magical times too. And I guess the one that's most powerful to me is that I was having a hard time with the Gelugpa practices, the sadhana practices. I just couldn't do that. I just couldn't do them. I didn't feel like I was going to get enlightened doing this. And I bumped into the Dzogchen tradition, and that seemed perfect to me. But here I was living at Vajrapani, helping to build a center, and all my friends, my family, and everyone was there. And then there was this Dzogchen practice that I was so attracted to, and seemed like that was the way to go. I was so confused. And I wrote Lama, and even though I'd written him before, and he used to tell people, just write me, you don't have to send it. And but I did send this one, and he wrote back a card or something and said, I'll be there soon. You know, we can talk. And that was when he came for the 6 yogas of Naropa. And I didn't really get a chance to talk to him, but that was a very amazing course, and had a couple of amazing moments for me that totally reconnected me with Lama. And at the end, when we were going up to offer kata, you know, I offered kata, and he leaned over and he said, did you get it this time, dear? And it was like, okay, I got it. Thank you, Lama. And, you know, that was the last conversation he and I had until I went to try to help out at the house in Rio Del Mar when he was sick and when he was. But that
You guys went to Copan. Is that where you met him?
No, we met him in Australia.
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 You can talk.
Thank you, Nick, for Australia.
Really? Yeah.
Richard, would you like to say something here?
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think the thing about Lama reaching people distance, there's a couple times in dreams where it's been like more real than life, so helpful, or in retreats, like he's actually there, you know, coming up the trail to our house at Vajrapani. But the retreat we did at Chenrezig when it was first opened in Australia after Diamond Valley, we did a 2-month retreat after the Copan style course, and Anila Ann was leading it. And this was kind of how the Copan courses went. I mean, in Australia they did. Rinpoche would wear us down, and Lama would come in and blast you. So during this retreat, it was pretty intense. And after it was 2 months long, after a couple of weeks into it, Anila Ann let the tape play through of the morning prayers that Lama and Rinpoche were leading. And at the end was this poem that you've probably all heard from Lama. Good morning, Golden Flower students. Come down in supermarket. And to tie in with Bev's thing about Dzogchen, it's like, absolutely, there is no coming and going. We were always together in space. So it was just, and so every once in a while, Anne would let this poem play through, and Lama was there. You know. Thank you.
Elaine.
Thank you, Judy.
Mind?
I was, yes,
And
I was,
let's say where you met Lama.
I met Lama at the Yucca Valley course in March of 1977. Yes. And it was there that the land for Vajrapani Institute was donated. And during that time, it was Pende who gave this rousing speech about how we really needed to have a retreat center in the United States. Janet said it was like, he was like a coach in a locker room. He was so pumped up. And then my husband at the time was a general contractor, and he says, let's just pack everything up and move to Boulder Creek, where this land's been donated. Live in a teepee and take a year out and build a retreat center. So we loaded our Volkswagen bus with our 2 children and drove to Boulder Creek from Santa Barbara. And of course, it didn't take 1 year to build a retreat center. So we lived in a teepee. My youngest son, Yeshe, was actually born in a teepee. And that's the story that I was remembering about Yeshe. When I came to Vajrapani, the place was covered with poison oak. And I was very allergic to poison oak. And the whole first year that I lived there, I had it more than I didn't have it. It was really pretty miserable. And when Kyabje Tsong Rinpoche came to lead a retreat at Camp Kennelan, and Lama Yeshe was there, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and Dr. Dolma was there, I was very pregnant with Yeshe. And I had poison oak. And when you're pregnant, one does not take any kind of cortisone. So someone said, go see Lama. So I was quite nervous about doing that, but I went, and Lama was so kind. He came to me and he put his hands on my belly, and he said,
Are you listening?
He said, we think very fortunate. And he gave the name Yeshe Kelsang, fortunate wisdom. And then he saw my face was all puffed and I had all this poison oak, and he said, oh, and he blew. He blew all over my face and my neck. And he said, go see Dr. Dolma. So I went to see Dr. Dolma. And after seeing her and taking Tibetan medicine, I didn't have poison oak again. Mama blew on it. So, you know, wow. Medicine man.
Well, maybe it's a good time to go to Pelge, who's taken up a practice of medicine. I don't know if that was influenced by Lama or not. Tell us about your meeting and how he affected you in your life.
I met him at Kopan. I think it was 76, same as, I think I was in California thinking about where could I meet the Dharma when he was teaching there in Yucca Valley. And P.D. Shane, I met her in San Francisco, and she told me how to find Kopan. So I made a beeline for Kopan. And as Rich was saying, you know, Lama Zopa would teach, but I couldn't understand him. Stories would go on and I wouldn't even know it was this continuation of the same story. And I was feeling pretty, God, I've come halfway around the world. I don't have enough money even to go back. Is this what I was looking for? And then there was a question and answer with Lama Yeshe came in, and I remember this so vividly. He got up on the throne and he looks out at everybody and he says, so you've come all this way to listen to Himalayan gorilla lamas. Which got a good laugh. It was good. And then he started the question and answer, and we all had written our questions on little sheets of paper, and somebody was reading them to him. And there had been a large earthquake in Iran quite recently, which had shaken, had done a lot of damage. And this one question was, how can you explain in terms of karma why there's an earthquake in Iran and not in someplace else? And he started laughing. He was doing, he's rolling around, leaning forward. He was laughing, rocking back and laughing. And pretty soon everybody in the whole meditation tent is just laughing. And then he starts gasping out, "Oh, you set me up. Oh, you set me. I can't believe. Oh, you set me up." Oh, it didn't matter. We're all just laughing. And finally he gasps out, because that is where the pressure is. I remember walking out of the tent really spaced, sort of like, what just happened? Oh, yeah, okay. It's all going to be okay. I'll be able to stay. Things are going to work out. Yeah.
That laugh was, it cured anything,
Oh, yeah.
I was talking to Stephen about putting together a whole laugh tape that we could just listen to the laughter. I've been sort of collecting little bits, but Carol Fields and I at one point left a course and said, we're going to make a room with big pictures of Lama, smiling, and a constant tape recording of him laughing, and no one will be able to come out depressed. Pende, you talked about Chodak a little bit. Is there something more personal you'd like to share now?
Lama Yeshe had, my interactions with him were crucial for different stages of my life. I had found myself in Dharamsala purely by accident and started studying at the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives under Geshe Nawang Dargay. Studying there because I first started studying Tibetan language there. I wasn't interested in Buddhism at all. But the people that I met in Dharamsala who were there, who had come specifically to India to study there, persuaded me to sit in on the teachings, and so I did. But generally I found that the teachings were great and fill up notebooks with everything that I was hearing. A lot of things I was hearing I had some trouble with, like the 3 lower realms. If I don't know, here's another religion trying to motivate us with fear, things like that. So it was, I was going through all of that. And then when we'd leave the class, it would be just the typical freak kind of drug culture life. And then Lama Yeshe was invited to give a talk. He was in town for some reason, and he was invited to give a talk at the library. So I sat in the front row, and he was sitting there in his meditation posture, apparently getting larger and larger and larger, because initially when I saw him meeting people outside the building and going, he was just, a small 5'3" Tibetan monk. But when he was sitting on this dais right in front of me, it just seemed to be getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually he started to give a talk. And he started to talk about the necessity of employing the teachings to control our minds, instead of just filling up our notebooks. He said, you're wasting the time of the Dalai Lama, the time of Geshe Nawang Dargay, and you're wasting your own time if that's all you do with it. And he started talking about the necessity of discipline, of living in a disciplined environment, of training, and all of these things really appealed to me. I had been involved in sports all my life. and I knew what discipline was, and I knew that since I'd been on the road, I was totally out of discipline. So I knew at that point, that's what I needed. And so that's what attracted me to go to Kopan and come under the influence of he and Lama Zopa. And there was a number of other times as well were quite crucial. Like the first interview that I had with Lama Yeshe was during the 5th meditation course, where I had heard Lama Zopa saying that, you know, if you really wanted to practice Dharma, then it had to be a pure practice of Dharma.
Mm-hmm.
And I got in mind that, well, what if I got in mind this idea of what a pure practice of Dharma was, and then didn't do it? Would that mean I wouldn't be a Dharma practitioner? And Lama Zopa says, oh yeah, that's the case. So my idea at that time was to finish the 5th meditation course, go back to Europe, buy a 650 Norton and just tour around like Dharma bums or something, you know? So I had to give that idea up. And then I started interviewing people who were monks and nuns and also lay people to see what the difference was in their life. And I just came up with this conclusion that the best way for me to lead my life was as a monk. And so I had an interview with Lama Yeshe, and that's what I told him. I went through my reasoning, and I said, but the problem is I'm almost out of money. And, but if I go back to the States to make money to support myself as a monk, I might be dead before I become a monk. And he rolled his eyes back into his head, and then he came out again, and he looked at me and he said, how about benefactors? And I never even thought about benefactors. You know, I didn't even use the word benefactor in my common speech. So, you know, like growing up in the States, there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? So I never even thought about that, but then I thought, hey, maybe that's possible. So I did become a monk with a group of other people. And we went back to Kopan, and I took my remaining money and put it in the kitty that we used, and we got tickets to be able to use to get our meals. And I remember the last ticket that I had for a meal, and I gave it, and I said, this is going to be interesting from now on. This is the last meal I know I'm going to get. And so I got my bowl of food, and I was handed an envelope. And it was an envelope from my family, and they told me they decided to give me some money.
Oh, good.
And from then on, I never had any financial problems while I was a monk. It was fantastic.
Thank you, Pindi. Mindful people are a little shorter, lovely things you said, but we're not going to get through everyone. Lenny? Lenny Cronish, do you have something you'd like to add?
Yes.
You can pass if you want.
Okay, well, since we're talking about early impressions with Lama Yeshe, I found my way to Kopan in 1975. And I was not seeking a Buddhist education or whatever. I'd gone to Nepal just because it was the mystic Orient and it was where things were happening. So I visited for an afternoon. I visited Adam Engel, who was there, sat in the Gompa. And I had my first exposure. Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa came in the late afternoon to speak to the Westerners that were assembled. And I was just horrified to see everybody flinging themselves onto the floor doing prostration. Horrified. And what came in my mind is that there's no way that I will ever do that. There's no way. I was raised in the Jewish tradition where you not bow down to idols. And that's the only way I could compute what I was seeing. Well, after that afternoon visit, I returned to Kopan a few days later for 2 weeks. And I attended those sessions every day. That's the only time I saw the lamas, actually. I sat in the back of the room, kept as quiet as possible. And one evening, I went out for a walk, and I encountered Lama Yeshe coming in the opposite direction. And he said, you know, good evening, dear. And I was very nervous, very, very nervous. And, you know, I said, "Good evening, Lama." And he said, "Thank you so much, dear." And then he went on to just chit chat with me about pleasantries, and every response that I gave, he said to me, "Thank you so much, dear," or "Thank you very much, dear." And I had no idea what he was thanking me for. And so this continued for a few minutes, and then he went on his way and I went on my way. And I had this experience of a lightning bolt in my heart. It felt like I was struck in my heart, and my heart just cracked open. I started weeping, 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 weeping. And I was filled with this absolute knowledge that he was thanking me for being there. He was thanking me for showing up. He was thanking me just for being alive and just for being myself. And I had never had that experience in my life. I was absolutely flooded with healing of every doubt or insecurity or painful experience I'd ever had in that moment. And I just felt what true love was. So that's how I got hooked. And I sat under a tree and wept, I think for about half an hour, and there was no emotion attached. It was just kind of like a big release, a big, you know, big water offering. And then the rest is history. Yeah. And I eventually came back home to Boulder Creek, and several years later, Vajrapani came to Boulder Creek, and I felt that he had come to my door and rooted me out and gotten me involved.
Thank you, Lenny. Below Lenny is Dr. Nick. Seems like Lama kept you busy for many years.
Me?
Have you been busy for many years because of Lama? What you got?
Playing the laugh. That's my okay, moved on. That's my ringtone. Anybody wants a ringtone?
Is Lama giving you some instructions?
So, okay, that's enough. Actually, from what Judy said, we've got about a half-hour tape of Lama's laughs. So we're hoping to make it available as an antidepressant at some point in the near future. But yeah, kind of busy, I guess. You know, my origin story is I was in Nepal to consummate a dope deal, and my Danish partner in crime wasn't there when Yeshikado and I arrived in Kathmandu, but another guy we met on the road in Bali and Thailand showed us around town and stuff, and he mentioned sort of as an aside that there was a meditation course, Buddhist meditation course starting next week at this little monastery outside of town. And there was something that I'd gotten a little interested in Thailand and Laos, reading books and stuff. So so we went up to Kopan and checked it out, and sure enough, the course was starting in a few days' time, and Anila, Ann and Peter were organizing it, but they weren't around. And we looked on the bulletin board and found out it was much cheaper to stay at Kopan than down in Kathmandu. So that was kind of the clincher. And as Lama would later say, "You attachment, Jewish money," and which was fairly perceptive. And so we decided to stay to do the course. And so, you know, it started off with Rinpoche teaching. It was the first course. This was in the fall of '72, third course, and the old Gompa was the new Gompa then, and the course was the first one to be held in there. And you know, for the first few days or a week, Rinpoche gave, you know, usual teachings: mind is beginningless, and perfect human rebirth, and suffering and attachment, and all that. And then during a break in the teachings, a bunch of us were sitting on the steps outside the old Gompa, one above the other, sort of picking lice out of each other's hair, and sort of this row of hippies, and a bit like sort of monkeys, I think. And I remember picking a louse out of somebody's hair and dropping it over the steps, and it landed on a spider's web, and a spider came out and jumped on it, and I felt really bad. So while we were doing that, Annie Leanne came up to me and said, "Oh, I hear you're a doctor." So I was then. And she said, "Could you come and see Lama?" So I didn't really know what she was talking about. As far as we knew, Rinpoche was the only Lama there. And so she took me down to the old house round the back, and there was this jolly, smiling monk sitting on his bed. And she said, "This is Lama." So I was like, "G'day, Lama," you know. And he'd bashed his shin on a glass top coffee table, and it had gotten infected. So I found out that he had rheumatic heart disease, and with, you know, deformed heart valves. And if you get bacteria in your blood, it can be very serious. They can lodge in these deformed valves and cause worse problems as they kind of fester in your heart. And so you need to give someone like that a pretty solid course of antibiotics. So we sent down to Kathmandu. He didn't need a prescription or anything. I got a bunch of penicillin syringes. So I went to give Lama his first injection, and that encounter also coincided, I guess, with my first recalled memory of creating one of the 5 inexpiable sins of drawing blood from a Buddha. But I made sort of the cardinal sin of refusing, of not tightening the syringe, the needle to the barrel of the syringe. And so penicillin is quite viscous. So when you inject it, you need a bit of pressure. So as I injected, the syringe popped out of the needle was left swinging in Lama's holy buttock, and penicillin went all over the wall, and Lama looked around and smiled and said, "Maybe we try again tomorrow, dear." So very embarrassed, I scurried out and came back the next day, and then we completed the course of antibiotics, and that's how I met Lama.
Vicky from, you're in London now, Vicky?
Yeah, I'm in London now.
Yeah, you know, Vicky has written several wonderful books. One of them called The Boy Lama. And we talked on the phone one time, and we actually found there was a chain of relationship between me and my friend Leslie Kendall and Vicky that brought Vicky to go to, initially to Kopan, but tell me a little bit more about your experience.
My first visit to Kopan. Okay, well,
or whatever, you know, you don't have to.
Well, I mean, most of what I know about Lama Yeshe, and I think most of you know more about Lama Yeshe than I ever did, but most of what I did know was put in that first book. But it was quite an extraordinary story, really, because I was working on a Fleet Street newspaper, which is the heart of national newspapers in Britain. And it was it was a daily newspaper. And when I got the phone call from Leslie Kenton, who was a beauty editor of Harper's Bazaar, Harper's Queen magazine, and she didn't phone to speak to me, she phoned to speak to somebody else. And I picked up the phone and I said, "Oh, hi, Leslie," because I knew her. "What are you up to?" And she said, oh, I'm going to go off to Nepal to meditate with the lamas, to do sort of the benefits of meditation on health. And I heard myself say, oh, gosh, that sounds really wonderful. And she said, well, come with me. And I said, okay, I will, just like that. And I'd actually been looking for something for quite a while, some spiritual nourishment. And I knew it lived in I knew I'd find it in the Far East. I'd gone to Hong Kong a few months previously, thinking I could do a kind of jump off from Hong Kong to various Eastern countries, but it didn't work out because I didn't like Hong Kong. So I came back to the newspapers with my tail between my legs when I got this phone call. So I went, it was like a month's time in, the Kopan in 1976. And I didn't think, I'd never read a book on Buddhism. I wasn't interested in Buddhism, but I was seeking something spiritual. Which might seem strange coming from a journalist, but anyway, you can have these curious contradictions. And yeah, so Lama Yeshe, what can I say? I had met and interviewed many, many people from all walks of life in my career. But I can honestly say that I never met anyone like Lama Yeshe. And, if you were looking for something spiritual, which I was, I discovered, after a while, it wasn't instant, it grew. My relationship with Lama Yeshe grew. But on that first meeting in 1976, I thought, this man is genuine, because I'd met lots of vicars and priests and goodness knows what else. And I had never met anyone as genuine as Lama Yeshe. And he spoke, I was impressed because he spoke not from books or from dogma. He spoke from the heart and from what he knew. And so you sensed that. You sensed he knew what he was talking about. And he was the absolute arch communicator. He wanted to reach us in whichever way he could. I was very impressed about that as a communicator myself. He would use all his gestures, all his eye rolling, all his laughter, all his eyebrow raising. He would just give and give and give in order to communicate. And I thought that was wonderful. And also, he didn't have any pomp. I've met many politicians and so they were all rather full of themselves. Lama Yeshe wasn't full of himself. He had no pomp. Do you know what I mean? So he was sitting there on this throne with all the brocade and everything else. And there was no feeling of, I am important, which was very rare, very, very rare. And then there was his laughter, which actually I thought was the absolute epitome of spirituality. Everything else was so solemn and so kind of dire and so earnest and so holier than thou. And Lama was holy, but he wasn't holier than thou because he could laugh. He could laugh at us, he could laugh at the universe, he could laugh at all sorts of things. And so that began my relationship with Lama Yeshe, which continued. And I was fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to be at the last Kopan course he did and saw him when he was very, very ill. So my relationship with Lama Yeshe grew. And I recognized right from the beginning that he was special. And so, I hung around and watched and watched and listened and had communications with him. So yeah, that's my beginning.
Thank you, Vicki. And those of you who haven't read The Boy Lama, try to get a hold of a copy. Kat Wilson from the state of Washington, you're up next.
I am? Okay. Hello, everybody. Well, I have to say I'm one of the least of people in this group for sure. For many reasons, but one being I just knew Lama for a very short period of time. I came to Vajrapani for the Mahamudra course, and that's where I met many of you folks. met Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And that was a mind-blowing experience, a month-long course, very incredible. And that changed my life right there. And then that's where I first heard about Lama Yeshe. Everyone was talking about him, and so I was just about a year into practitionerhood, being a Buddhist, a student of Buddhism. I didn't call myself a Buddhist right then, but when Paula Chichester and I decided we really wanted to go to the first Dharma celebration, which happened in Dharamsala, the second half of the Dharma celebration, which was in Dharamsala, India. I think that was in 1982, if I recall. So that's where I first met Lama, and all these other amazing teachers. And of course, yeah, His Holiness Dalai Lama and His Holiness's tutors, and Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa together. It was just like totally, truly an amazing experience. And I think I began to realize that watching Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe together, that I began to think of them as like good cop, bad cop, and there would be someone who would come down really hard, be a hardliner, and then generally Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and then Lama Yeshe would come in with the big laughter and the big heart, and together they just made a great team, I thought. But so I was there for just, soaking everything in, attending all these amazing teachings, and with Paula and all of our other friends there. And so that was 2 months. And then I heard, I think from Paula, that Lama really loved his tulips. He had a little house outside of, up the hill from Tushita. And he planted a lot of tulips, and he loved them very much. And then there were bands of roaming monkeys that would come through and just devour all of his tulips every time they would, be out there and beautiful, and then they'd just be gone. So we came up with a notion, along with a couple of people, Jack Morrison, Paula, myself. We gathered a construction crew, essentially, and we built Lama a little greenhouse addition to his home, so that he could plant his tulips on the inside and enjoy them, and the monkeys wouldn't be able to eat them. So we took another month, and Jack consulted with an architect to make sure the plans would be good. And then we had a woman from France, and a woman from Australia, another student from New Zealand.
Beware of time a little bit, Kat.
Yeah. Anyway, we took a month. We took an extra month, and we built this this lovely spot for Lama to enjoy his tulips.
A lot of people were building, but you remind me of when I was staying in Tushita. The gardener actually dug up all the plants and planted them on one side of the building. When the monkeys were on the other side, they'd go away, and he'd take them back and plant each day. Yeah. They transmitted, moved the tulips or the other flowers from one side to the other. Christine is in the back there. Christine, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Well, I was with Kat at the Mahamudra course, but actually we came and studied with John Landau for a week. Introduction
Oh yeah,
to
of course.
Buddhism.
Yes,
The
yes,
first,
yes.
The first course at Vajrapani. And it was actually a fantastic course where then I stayed for that month. And of course I heard about Lama Yeshe and I returned to study at the 6 yogas, and that's when I met him. Well, I had met him in some dreams before that, but
dreams, more dreams.
I had the experience kind of like Lenny, just the first time he drove up, I think he was walking towards the main gompa, just tears coming down without really I didn't even know why, but they just flowed and they flowed and they flowed. And I was standing next to Jan Willis and she said, that never happens to me around Lama. And anyway, but then he gave the initiation. This is what I want to say. He gave the initiation to 6 yogas for 3 or 4 days, maybe 5 days, and took us into the mandala the way that, everyone's explaining how he touched right into you. And he took me and right in, I could feel every shape, every color, every room, everything. I was inside that mandala for that. And I've never forgotten. That experience stands out in my life as one of the most remarkable things that ever happened to me.
Great.
Not to mention the rest of the years.
You know what I'd like to do? We have from George Galt, a wonderful song. And George, do you want to intro it? We'll get back. Don't worry, we're going to get all of you who haven't spoken. But I just thought it would be nice to hear the song now. Do you want to tell us something about writing it, George?
So this was a song that it happened driving back from San Francisco one night, and it's one of those songs. Some songs you work at, some songs just show up. This one just showed up, and it came to me driving home in the car one day, and I wrote it down, and that was it. It's basically a dedication song for the work that's been done at Vajrapani and the creation of Vajrapani and all of the teachings that have happened there. So,
and Vajrapani's had a real. I think it's going to go on. I'll make my comment later. Go on and play the song.
When Lama Yeshe first saw Vajrapani, it was not as you see it now. But Lama said to the people around him, build a pond and the fish will come. In our Lama's grand vision, we all are playing a part. The merit that we have created, we would like to dedicate. May we master an ocean of teachings. May we answer an ocean of prayers. May we cure all beings' illness. May we dry an ocean of tears. May we sing an ocean of praises. May we comfort an ocean of care. May we ourselves become Buddhas to lead
and there's more verses than that. Singing's been custom at Vajrapani, and there's a whole songbook of Dharma songs. But George, can you tell us an anecdote or something about your interaction with Lama that remains in your mind?
Absolutely. I can tell you what, I will tell you where I met Lama and what hooked me. So let me say what a joy it is to see all of you and to hear these stories. I'm really enjoying this. Thank you, Judy, for putting it together. And it's an honor to be included in this august company. I mean, how fantastic is that? So to me, the first course I went to was Lake Arrowhead in 1975. So to me, I'm not an old student. The old students are Dr. Nick and Chuck, Petey Shane, John McKay, John Landau. Those are the old students. I'm a newcomer. So I had a girlfriend in high school, and she had gone following the hash trail to Afghanistan and wound up in Kopan and met Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa there, and then devoted her life to them. And after, she wrote me a letter and said, if these folks ever come to the United States, you must go to see them. So I heard that they were going to be teaching a course at Lake Arrowhead, and I went down there, and that was where I met them in 1975 and met many of you there as well. What got me that Lama was talking about, of course, it was the format that you all have described, the Dharma tag team of, if you know professional wrestling, tag team wrestling, you know, you'll one of them will handle you for a while and then the other one will jump in. And that was how, of course, Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa ran those courses. So Rinpoche had spoken for several days, and it was time for Lama Yeshe to come. I don't remember what he spoke about. Many of you have described this heart connection that you felt immediately with him. I'm somewhat thicker than that, so that's not what I got. But what was interesting to me, because my background was in science and in rational Western thought, so college education, all of that stuff. So Lama Yeshe presented Buddhism in an extremely scientific way, and by that I mean he presented it as a repeatable experiment. If you do this, this, and this, you will get this result. And that really appealed to me. And then at the end of that first talk that he gave, I don't remember what he spoke about. My guess is it was bodhicitta, because that would have been the format. But he said something that has stuck with me forever, and it was the moment I said, now I can actually pay attention to this guy. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, if there's anything that I've said that it makes sense to you and is useful for you, please use it in your life. If there's anything that I've said that you don't connect with, just leave it, no big deal. And that was what got me. So.
Francesca.
Oh, hi. Yeah, so many of the things I'm hearing are just resonating so much today. Yeah, I guess I'll tell the story how I met him, which is slightly different. I was in Asia, I think I told you, Judy, in '73, traveling the road, looking to find what was real in the world. I wasn't thinking of hippies or anything. I just wanted to know what was real, and I would go from place to place. And I had an experience with Buddhism in Bangkok. I met Frau Kanti Palo and was extremely moved by that. And then went on to Nepal while all of you were having a really meaningful first or second course. I don't know which it was. And I missed the whole thing. I was sitting in Kathmandu reading my book of Frau Kanti Palo instead. And then I went all the way home to Los Angeles. And a year later, Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa came to America for the first time. Was that not 1974? I think so. And I heard about their presence through a column that was written by John Schwartz interviewing Chuck Thomas. And I went to an introductory talk by Lama Yeshe in Westwood. And like George, I was very skeptically inclined, scientifically inclined. So I walked into this room with this man who barely spoke English, expecting very little, and was so stunned. I have no idea what he said that night, but there was a heart connection. What's that wonderful line from Annie Dillard? I never knew I was a bell until suddenly I was lifted and struck. I went out that night and went down to the beach off of Manhattan Beach, and I just was reverberating. I don't know what happened to me, but I was definitely wanting to hear more. The skepticism, the caution in my approach to life was still there. And I went to the course at Arrowhead and listened to the two combo punch of the two teachers, which was formidable. I would get all tight in a ball when Lama Zopa talked. I couldn't relate to so much of what he was saying. And Lama Yeshe would come in and just in a few amazing metaphors and that laugh, it would ease all my concern. And like George said, put it on the shelf, take what's useful. And he also said one further thing, which really opened the door for me with my cautious mind. He said, I know this is different for you. I know this is strange, but I want you to try to pretend it's true. I challenge you. Pretend it's true for 2 years. Do you remember that, George? I don't, no one else has told that to me, but I heard it. And see what happens. Try it out as if it were all true and see what happens. And I'll just tell one further anecdote that from that time, it was after Vajrapani had started, and he was there at Vajrapani, and he gave us the Bodhisattva vows for the first time. And I was storming around all day, beating my head on trees because I couldn't wholeheartedly accept karma, which still confused me to some degree, and you're not supposed to take them unless you can accept quite a bit. And, but I did, I asked him, and he allowed me to take them that night. I don't think I talked to him directly, but I was sitting in the front row on my cushion, taking these vows, and I look down and there's a scorpion walks out from under my pillow. And I look up, and then a big spider walks out from under my pillow on the other side. It was like, it was so improbable, things I've never seen before or since at Vajrapani, that it just blew my little careful mind altogether. I have held those vows ever since and honored all my time with Lama Yeshe. Anyway, I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Francesca. Thank you for all you've done.
Mm-hmm.
Karuna and Pam are here. And everybody's heard of Karuna and Pam staying in Nepal for so many years. But could you give us a little thumbnail about 9 years in Nepal? Is that how much it is?
Yeah, I was a spiritual romanticist. I can come up with it. I had been involved. I was from Los Angeles, and through my experience with drugs and psychedelics, I became involved in the Hindu tradition, and then found my guru, and then that fell out. And I was in college in Olympia, Washington, and there was a year in Nepal program. It's 1975, and I thought, I'm not going to go now because this Hindu thing I really left a bad taste in my mouth. My advisor told me, well, go anyway, and do a study on real Hinduism. So I did go, and I looked where, I didn't know where Nepal was. So I looked, I go, oh, it's next to India. I can sneak into India and find my guru. So I had that thought. And through a long series of things, I ended up at Kopan, and I had a dream of Lama Yeshe. The first night I was there, I had not met him. I had a dream of a Lama. And the next day there was this Lama walking through the garden with people, and in my dream there was a Lama going like this. And people remember that Lama often bowed to people. It's really interesting. And I looked, and it was the dream, the Lama in my dream. So that started a whole process. So I was romantically like, oh, this is my guru. I didn't have the thought that he wasn't my guru. I don't know why. But I want to segue from there into, people are talking about Lama's laugh and his demeanor and his qualities of joyfulness and love. And he really infected everybody, my parents, you know, I mean, there was no one that wasn't touched, very similar to His Holiness, I think, where no one walked away feeling, wow, this isn't, this is a special man. But for me personally, that phase didn't last very long. That was about the first year and a half. And after that, when I heard Lama laugh, I usually thought it was laughing at me. So so I used to avoid Lama. And when we go to teachings, I would sit behind the pillars because he was so in my face. It was, and I know there are other people here that had the same issue, but Lama was so in my face that I just didn't want to run into him. And I had to run into him because I often did his appointments and letters, and I was running things at Kopan and had to interact. Sometimes I'd go outside his room to have a meeting, and I would just stand there for 5 minutes, just dreading going in. So one little story on that is that Lama was teaching, I think it was either a commentary to Tara, or it might have been when he did his Utanamshe teachings that went on for some years. And I was sitting there in the audience, and I was behind a pillar, and this is in the old tent, people remember. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Lama said something like, I can't remember. He said, "Isn't that not right? Isn't it, Karuna?" And the whole tent went quiet. And, you know, I had no idea what he was really talking. Isn't that not right? You know, his language was, you know, there's a triple negative there. And I think I actually answered it grammatically correctly. And I said, yes. And he burst out in that laughter of his, exploding. Everyone, in, like Pelge was talking, I think before, you know, everyone in the tent is laughing, having the great time. Lama's got those tears coming down his face, which, you know, he starts picking up the fruit from the side of the table and throwing it at me. He takes the cuttas off the front, starts throwing them at me, and everyone's laughing. And I'm just like trying to dig a hole in the earth that I can crawl into. And he said, he laugh. And then he dedicated, and then as he's getting up from the throne, he says, "Oh, we'll see if Karuna comes up with the right answer tomorrow." This is my English teacher, and he doesn't even know English. So the next day, I'm just tortured. I'm so stressed. You know, I mean, seriously, this is my issue. I don't want to be confronted. There's people that can confront with Lama, but for me, it was like, this was the worst. And so the next evening, and I didn't have a hard time sleeping, but I'll tell you something, sorry not to go on too long, but Lama always called me lazy, which I am, but I didn't understand what he meant because I worked long hours. So I'm in my room getting ready to go to the 7 o'clock teaching, whatever it was, and I'm tortured. And my mind is full of these visions of, I'm going to get so beat up again tonight. And all of a sudden it occurred to me, that's laziness. You know, not giving in and believing that mind of projection and not doing something about it was laziness. So after many years, I finally understood why Lama called me lazy. So the teaching that night, Lama taught, and I'm on pins and needles, but I was a little more relaxed. Pins and needles, and then it ends. He dedicates, and I think, phew, I made it. And then he said, "Oh, before I leave, looks like Karuna found the answer."
Wow.
Wow.
So there's my story. Pam?
Pam, how did you get hooked in?
Okay, so I had just really quickly jumping through the trail that led me to Copan, 1978. I'd left Australia. I had a good friend who was actually a professor at the university in Asian religions, and he'd gone on a research tour around India, and he completely got overwhelmed by Satya Sai Baba. So he said, Pam, it's time for you to go. You got to go to this course in South India. So I left in 1978 to go to South India for a course. It was, I believe, a 3-week course at Sai Baba's ashram. And at the end of that, I had always thought I must have been a Hindu, whatever. But I got to the end of that course and it's like, wow, this is so not my path. I made a lot of prayers, traveled through India, Rishikesh, maybe I'll find it here, and ended up in Dharamsala. And I was supposed to be there just, I had a plane ticket out to meet some of my family in London. And a big monsoon storm came the night before I was supposed to leave and closed the road and I couldn't get out. And there I was stuck in Dharamsala. And that's where I stayed. Long story, but it started to met His Holiness and His Holiness Ling Rinpoche. Attended teachings, Geshe Dage at the Tibetan Library of Books and Archives. And then from there, I'd had a lot of different teachings, but I felt like I needed something to hold it all together, string it all together. So I heard then about the Copan course, and I left India to arrive at the Copan course the night before it started in 1978, the 11th course. And through that 1 month, I mean, there's no doubt, it was just my whole world, the way I perceived things. It all started to make a lot more sense and a lot more real, but at the same time, I knew that this was so impactful. My life would never be the same. And if I'm making a mistake, I'm in trouble, but I can't turn away from this. And so I remember when my first interaction with Lama there, and he was seeing everybody, we were all lined up to see him. And I remember just the way he connected with me, my feeling inside me was like, oh, Lama knows me. And I felt so safe, like sort of mother-father energy. So at the end of the course, that was really my only real interaction with Lama during the course. But at the end of the course, Lama loved to have, celebrations, picnics, parties, music, dancing, that kind of thing after each of the courses. And this time it was going to be a picnic at Balaju, a park there not far from Copan. And it was up the top of a hill, and some of the monks, a lot of the monks were there too, the young boys, and playing, shuttlecock and things like that. Anyway, it was a nice little picnic. And as we were leaving, it's up the top of a steep hill. So it's like a river of people, a stream of people coming down the hill. And I didn't realize, but anyway, I was thinking, I was part of this stream of people, and I thought of this friend of mine who's on crutches. Some of you might know him, Aldous Pelodis. Anyway, so I thought, oh my gosh, maybe Aldous is having a hard time with his crutches coming down this hill. I better step out and see if he's okay. I stepped out, not realizing Lama was a couple of people behind me, and he grabbed me by the arm and he pulled me back in. And he said, well, dear, he said, what did you think of this course? And I said, Lama, it was amazing. I said, I don't know what to do with my life now. I feel like I want to press a button just to be there, to be enlightened, to go to that place. And he said, by this time, as we're wandering down, we're at the bottom of the hill. And Lama said, well, dear, he said, I tell my students, and I like my students, you're not just going to sit in a cave and meditate in a forest. He said, you have to learn to live in the world. And then he led us over to there are these big ponds there in Balaju with fish in them, but I'd never even seen the fish. I'd been there sometimes before, but I'd never seen the fish. But Lama just took some bread from his leftover bread from the picnic and he threw it into the pond. And the pond immediately just became solid with fish. I mean, big fish, huge fish. And no longer could you even see the water. It was just all fish. And it was a huge pond. And I was, oh my gosh, look at that. And I said, but how come they're so starving? There must be a lot of people who come to this park that feed them. Lama said, dear, they're like, pretas. He said, doesn't matter how much you give them, it's never enough. Right? He said, hungry ghosts. And I always go back, pretas, hungry ghosts. said, it's never enough. And that, when we left there, we went back to Kopan. A lot of people had left and they rearranged rooms a little bit. And, you know, let the monks have their rooms back again because we were staying in their rooms. And there was somebody I didn't know who was in the room I'd been staying in. And this guy came into the room to meet with her, and they were talking about how—
Pam, be conscious of time.
Just at the end. And talked about how they didn't have enough volunteers to teach the monks English. And I was sitting there and I raised my hand and said, maybe I can help. And that was the beginning of or the next juncture of what kept me in Kopan for 10 years. So.
Wow. And you met Karuna there.
He was the guy who came into the room. So he was in charge of the English
rest
program.
is history.
The rest is history.
Pete, we've lost Dean, sorry to say. He disappeared. But Peter, I'd like to ask you and Nick to tell us something about the production, kind of the thumbnail of how can it even be a thumbnail in a something that's lasted so long, you know, in the work. I'd like to start out, because Adele couldn't be with us today, of a little roll-in tape of Adele. So those of you who have not met her can kind of get a sense of who she is and her style. So can we do that roll-in?
Lama Yeshe did not fit the Sarah J. traditional Geshe model. He said he realised emptiness in the debating court at Sarah, and from then on he hid from social chatter and pretended to be asleep. He locked his door. At Buxa, the refugee camp, he did the same. He hid from people. He was not available. And he got a tiny hut as far away from the crowd as he could get. Lama was totally renounced, and no one lived more simply. Then he met the Yinjis and was not upset when he no longer had time to actually take his Geshe exams. He said, anyway, Geshe Yeshe sounds ridiculous. He wore unorthodox robes, a fuchsia-coloured fringed zen, when it's supposed to be a maroon and a rolled hem, and sleeveless sort of parka tops. He said, oh, these zens, he said, it's a bit old-fashioned, isn't it? You know. But not, well, he was also, in other ways, extremely conservative and orthodox. But all of this was pretty shocking to some in the very conservative Tibetan monastic community, because Lama was very different. However, His Holiness, Trijang Rinpoche, Ling Rinpoche, Serkong Rinpoche, Geshe Rabden, all the biggest Lamas cheered him at every turn.
Well, that's a taste of Adele. And Peter, maybe you could start out telling us a little bit about how this all got started and how long it took, the construction of the Big Love book.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yeah. Very well.
Okay, good. So I have to just step back a little. I took the second course in Kopan, 1971. It was only, I think it was 10 days. And during that time, I realized Rinpoche was a saint. And I'd traveled overland with Harvey Horrocks, Phil Elliott. And we'd taken 6 months and we were pretty exhausted. We'd done some trekking. We'd worked for a missionary group as volunteers, got ourselves fired for unbecoming behavior. And so somebody told me, I was down in Kathmandu, Hungry Eye restaurant or something like that, and someone said, there's going to be a meditation course at Kopan. And there's a Canadian nun. It's going to be in English. There's a Canadian nun there. And that sounded fascinating, and it sounded like, you know, really good aerogram content to write home about. And so And so I went to the course, and it put everything together, all my Christian upbringing, everything that I'd been sort of, I hadn't felt was satisfactory, put it all together. And I stayed on after the course, and it was fabulous. We'd sit at dinner with Mummy Max and Lama and Rinpoche and Losang Nema, Steve Molaski. And I got involved really with Lama. There was no cosmic lights, no dreams, it was just Lama's dynamism. He was, I think, someone I just felt, he was the business. And he had so much to do. And so I got involved in helping. Sister Max was working and applying all her salary to whatever Lama wanted to do, and it was building Kopan, providing for the young monks of Everest Center. I got involved with trying to find electricity in Kopan, finding steel rebar, finding cement, we had to get special permissions. Everything was rationed. Steve and Chodak and Pete Northend from Australia, we helped build. Then in Dharamsala, I was asked if I'd go and look after Tushita. So, and then after that, I traveled with Lama for several years. And I was involved in organizing world tours, organizing teachings, the early structure of FPMT itself, and helping with that. And, looking back on it, Lama, he had this huge vision. I mean, really, I can only see it now. I knew there were things at the time, but Lama was building a Kopan, not just for Westerners. He was building it for initially Sherpas, later Manangpas, later Tibetans. He was building it. He was building it for building Kopan and then centers around the world. And it was so frustrating. Lama had this enormous energy. People really related with the energy. There was never any money, never enough money. I mean, we somehow came together with a refugee community. They'd only been refugees for 10 years. They had nothing. The Cultural Revolution was still, in all its craziness, was just up the road, from Nepal. It was still going on, and that was very real for Tibetans. And Lama, every offering he got, every opportunity he got to pull some money together, it went to every center. And I became involved in that. People gave offerings around the world. It was mostly Sister Max that put the money initially. But at some point I said to Lama, look, there's so much to do. We have to make money. I'm going to go to Hong Kong and I'm going to try and make some money. And that's what I did. And actually, interestingly, Lama, when I went off, or just before I went off, he gave me this $10 bill. But what it says on it, it says, "Dear Peter, big love, Lama Yeshe." Then down here, it says, 1980, need 10 million. And another time, I said, what can I do, Lama? This was in Kopan. He said, I need Kopan knee deep in dollars, this much deep. And it wasn't for Lama. He wanted to develop universal education. Well, you can see what's happened. And Lama did all that he did in 15 years, from not even speaking English to when he passed away. He did all this in 15 years. So anyway, I went to Hong Kong. This is the point. This is to answer your question. And it was very, very hard, not speaking the language, not having any connections. It wasn't as though I was already involved in a business and just took somebody's customer list. And we started a business, Mark and Stephen Fruin, Nicole, Jackie, and various others. And after some time became somewhat successful. And when I looked, Dear Rinpoche, Dear Rinpoche was suddenly landed with FPMT. And he'd always been very much in the background, and it was taking time to organize and gel. But I saw a few things that from the perspective of being outside of Kopan. And one of the things was, look, all Lama's teachings, they're in cupboards, they're on cassette tapes, they're on pieces of paper all around the world. And so I felt to pull that together. And then I thought, you know, Lama's biography, we have to capture it. This was about probably 1983 or 1984. No, it was earlier than that, sorry. It was in the 70s when I traveled, and Adele and I got on really well. We looked after the place where Lama was in Australia. But anyway, in the early 80s, this thought to pull a biography together came about, and I was still in touch with Adele. She was a writer, writing for a newspaper, the Melbourne Age. And I said, look, what do you think? We try and put a biography together for Lama Yeshe. And we agreed it was going to take 18 months. And we actually wrote a contract. We wrote a contract, and I was going to fund it. And Adele was going to go all around the world, and she was going to interview everybody, and it was going to be done in 18 months. So that was about I can't really remember. It was probably early 90s, 91, 92. And since then, we've carried on. I think we met once since then, but everything has been on Skype and telephone. And Adele, she started off with 500 interviews. She transcribed it. George Farley helped her sequence it chronologically. It was 3,000 script. And Adele did, I think I have on my computer, she did 13 revisions, tried to cut it down. She did 1,000 days of 8 Mahayana precepts, praying to Lama that there would be none of her voice, that it would be only Lama that came through. A lot of the interviews, people talked about themselves, which was natural, but she tried to, you know, very discreetly separate out the over personal parts and just focus on Lama. And then after about 9-10 years ago, we asked Nick if he would consider publishing it, and Nick and his team since then have done the most amazing job. They pulled together the photo archive really for the purpose of the book. And although we kept, you know, we kept really giving him a hard time because it was taking so long, once we'd taken so long doing our part, mostly Adele's part. But anyway, there's the result. Sorry, it was a bit long, but.
Thank you so much, Peter. And we have some things we want to accomplish by the end here.
Yeah.
And
well, Nick has to say his part.
Nick has to say something, and I have to find out whether Dean was appearing and disappearing. It looks like Dean's out again. He was in the car a while ago. So let's go on to Nick. Can you talk more about your role in publishing Big Love?
Well, I think Peter's laid out pretty much the whole story. It's you know, what he and Adele accomplished is really amazing. I mean, that was the really hard work. You know, all I had to do was raise $500,000, but and you know, I have some, you know, really amazing people helping me with the archive. So, you know, I was a little bit like the ringmaster, that's all. You know, everyone else did all the work.
Thank you so much. And you got all those beautiful photos. So those of you who don't have the book, it's such a pleasure to wake up. I do it in the morning when I wake up, read a few chapters, learn more about my friends. Really, really nice. So we have some other things to accomplish, and of course, part of our agenda is going to go by the wayside.
You want to raise your hand?
We've gotten Jackie. I just wanted you to say a little something about seeing Lama from life to life as you have. It's so particularly interesting. Where are you, Jackie? Is Jackie there? Oh, there she is.
Unmute, Jackie.
Okay. So Ready to go, Jackie?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, I can say a little bit about that, but I'd like to end with the story that you suggested, Judy. But yeah, seeing, maybe everybody knows that I worked with Lama from the time that I met Lama, basically, first being an apprentice to Peter Kedge. And then when Peter went off to Hong Kong and was really self-sufficient there, then I worked directly with Lama. And then when Oso was born, I had very little connection with Oso. And then last year at Vajrayogini, I'd actually seen Oso. I picked Oso up at the airport when he was like 2, and I was with him when he was recognized by His Holiness as the incarnation of Lama Yeshe. Then I met him one time at Disney World when he was perhaps, I don't know, 5. And then one time in 2012, he came to Miami, and that was the extent of my encounters with Oso. But in Vajrayogini last year, we ran into each other, and he asked me to pick up where I'd left off. And I've been working with Oso since then. And I think it's a very parallel situation. Yeah, he had this picture taken. This is his public image picture. It's an approved picture. You can circulate it. But the incarnation of Oso is exactly parallel to Lama Yeshe. He's a rogue. He's not marching to anybody else's beat. And he's taking care of the people, the fringe people, like Lama did, the people that don't, the non-traditional people. And now, due to the age of degeneration, they're even further away from the core Dharma. So if Lama had to change his presentation style from the traditional style in order to accommodate us, that's exactly what Oso's doing too. But his vision, as Peter has said, Lama's vision is huge. I mean, yeah, Lama's vision was huge, and Oso's vision is huge. So stay tuned. Subscribe to One Big Love. I mean, he's on fire now. He started the Global Tree Initiative in January and said that we needed to make an offering of trees to His Holiness. There's, a huge story around this, but in just a short matter of months, we were able to offer over 86,000 trees planted to honor His Holiness on His Holiness's birthday. Now Oso wants 1 million trees planted for the next birthday. So please subscribe to plantgrowsave.com and get on board supporting Oso, because it's truly amazing. Read his blogs, subscribe to his blogs. I learn from them all the time. But
so tell us the other story that you were
okay, so this is sort of bringing things into a landing. Because Oso Lama was non-traditional, and he had naysayers in this process of developing the FPMT. There were Tibetans in particular that couldn't quite understand why Lama was fraternizing, dealing with these barbarians, these white barbarians. But Lama always said, we just keep going, dear. We don't listen to what people say. We know what we're doing. We do it, and they will see. So one time when Lama was in England, in London, Lama was invited by Sogyal Rinpoche to go to Sogyal Rinpoche's center. And I'm not clear if Lama thought that Lama was going to be speaking. I think that Lama thought Lama was going to visit the center, but when we got there, it was very apparent because the Gompa was jam-packed full, and Lama walked down the center aisle and then sat in the front row on the ground. And then began the traditional Tibetan tug of war, where Sogyal Rinpoche saying that Lama had to get on the throne, and Lama's becoming smaller and smaller like a puddle on the front row. And Sogyal Rinpoche is trying to put him on the throne, and Lama's getting smaller. And eventually Sogyal Rinpoche won, and Lama was on the throne. And now, Elaine, if you remember at Camp Kennelin, I think you were there when Song Rinpoche was about to arrive, and we'd had all the chalk drawings put out, and Song Rinpoche was just about to arrive, and Lama paced back and forth. Do you remember that? He paced back and forth, and he told us who Song Rinpoche was and who we were going to see. Because without getting this information from Lama, we probably wouldn't have appreciated who was coming and who was going to be teaching us. And this is what Sogyal Rinpoche did. Sogyal Rinpoche paced the entire width of his Gompa, back and forth, and he was so earnest. And he talked to every single one of his students in that room, and he told those students what they were seeing when they saw Lama Yeshe. And he told those students that if it weren't for Lama Yeshe, they would not be there now. They would not have any Dharma. There would be no center. There would be nothing if it weren't for Lama Yeshe. And he said Lama had put Vajrapani in America. He put Manjushri in England. He put Chenrezig in Australia. And then he said, and with all of Lama's wisdom, he put Jason Papa in Italy with the Pope.
Thank you, Jackie. We're going to have some comments that have come in on the Facebook, read by Stephen, I believe.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, we've had, so since we started, I just thought I'd make a note that we've had between 65 and 90 people watching from abroad, from Germany, Italy, New York. We have some friends at the Dharmakaya Center in Reno joining us, from Australia. And we have a few remembrances and comments that have come in, perhaps from friends of people in the room. So first of all, Jampa Shanaman says, great stories. Hello to everybody. The Lama is in all of our hearts. We have Tenzin Punsok, who met Lama in Buxar. He says he stood out amongst the ultra-conservatives at that time and had faith in Trijang Rinpoche until his last day. Noted translator and scholar Gavin Kilty says hello to everybody, as does Victoria Easterday. Also Elizabeth, if I may get her name wrong, Drucker, D-R-U-K. She says hello to everybody and a special shout out to Pende. And then we have some wonderful remembrances from Robin Brentano. And so I'm going to read a couple of those and then we'll turn it back to you, Judy. Robin writes, I met Lama in Kopan Monastery in 1975. He was the most skilled communicator I'd ever met. He had the ability to read the room and speak as one of us, which of course he really was in the deepest way. He had this lovely way of asking, are we communicating, dear? Making sure we understood the points he was making. And he didn't hesitate to joke, dance, and sing if it meant he could reach someone in a deeply personal way. Another memory from Robin. I had the good fortune to participate in an editing retreat in Italy in 1983 to work on preparing transcripts of Lama's Tantric teachings for publication. The editing team had a session with him just before we went into retreat, and I don't remember specifically what he told us, but I do remember the distinct feeling that Lama was casting a net into the future by making his teaching available in print form. One of the results of the retreat was Introduction to Tantra, beautifully edited by Jonathan Landau. This book has opened the door to the practice of Tantra for vast numbers of people around the world because Lama communicated the principles of inner transformation so simply yet so deeply. So just, we've had viewers, as I mentioned, from Germany, Portugal, Australia. We're just so glad that all of you could join in with us today, and everybody sends their greetings and lots of love for the Big Love book. So please take note of that, and if you can, seek it out. Lots of happy readers joining in on Facebook. Thank you, Judy. Back to you.
Well, I wanted to spend more time on the end of Lama's life, but we're really running against time now. So I'd like to roll a little montage tape that goes over some of the parts of the end of his life.
Ma.
And in the ensuing years that I was able to spend some time with Lama Yeshe, this impression just got stronger and stronger, that Lama Yeshe was the most alive person I had ever met.
If you weren't crying before, that was something. Vajrapani held the cremation, and lamas came from all over the world to give lamas passing. I'd like to thank all of you for being here, coming in from all over the world, sharing some thoughts and your wonderful experiences with Lama. This is our first experiment in doing it this way, and I think we can get better and better at it. Sometime I'd like to have some sessions with just a few people at a time so we can get the really long stories. So farewell, and there's a goodbye here from Lama that will run now.
Good morning, Golden Flower student. And enjoy divine wisdom chanting as much as possible. Cultivate or activate wisdom action. And stay in the universal compassion wisdom. Never come down in the supermarket. Wait a while. See you soon into everlasting peaceful sky, space. And unified as much as possible with the universal compassionate wisdom. See you soon on the moon. Okay, goodbye. Okay. Actually, we are always together in space. Going, coming, going, coming. Absolutely, there's no going and coming. Goodbye. Thank you, everything. Okay.
Lynn has some words to say?
Well, it's pretty hard to say anything after that. But I'd like to formally thank all of you in the room, all of you participating out there through Facebook by watching, listening, contemplating. And this is Sangay, sorry. At least I get a cat to pet after that. Honest to gosh, you guys, all sheltering in place. Wow. Thank you very much on behalf of Tse Chen Ling Center for Tibetan Buddhist Studies, 30 years going. And this is one of our, would you say, one of our best offerings to the world. So thank you all, everybody. I'm getting teary. So bye-bye. And if you want to watch this, again, you can go to our video section immediately after this ends and see the whole darn thing. And eventually this will be on YouTube channel, our YouTube channel. So thank you again. And thanks to the crew, everybody, Judy, especially you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you. Thanks, Judy.
Thank you.
Lynn.
Thanks, everybody.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you again.
Thank you.
None of us would be here if all of us weren't here. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just getting going.
Great.
We need longer.
Exactly.
True, we need longer.
To scratch the surface.
It's the truth.
Yeah.